Okay, thanks, Chris. I noticed there are a lot of questions in the chat box, and as I was going through the prezo, I couldn't really focus on it much. So I guess if anyone has a question they wish to ask, and just sitting here, if you can raise your hand and Shane can unmute you. Robbie has his hand raised.
Can't see. Hey, can you hear me now? I lost my, here we go. Okay. So I put it in the group thing, but does this group consensus based, how would it combat? Like I remember a few times at area service and at regional, there was somebody wanted to put like, oh, what about this? And they were like, oh, you had to put the motion in by a certain time. And then they, you know, it was like, you have to wait till next service body. And it was like, what? Like it was confusing. And one time in my home group, they were trying to decide white key tag first or white key tag last. And I was like, well, I would have had a group that did it in the beginning and in the end. Maybe we could add, and they were like, I was trying to add that to the conversation. Someone was like, point of order. And like Robert's Rules of Order says, and I was like, yeah, fuck you. Rah, rah, rah. We got in a big argument, and I was like, all I know is you interrupted me, and I know Robert's Rules of Order. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I just said that, and it kind of interrupted. So how would that specifically, the thing with the motion being not put in on time, how would this thing affect that?
We don't care about what time it comes in. If it comes in new business, it comes in. I mean, we don't. I mean, Robert's Rules of Order has lots of things like that just, and people abuse those, you know, and this, you know, I mean, the one challenge is if you've got a unanimous consensus, one person can come in and, you know, the Midwest Zonal Forum uses a unanimous consensus, which has worked. So even unanimous consensus can work. Chicagoland, we have 80%, you know, World Service Conference is 80%. You know, Jackie, I see, is on here. She can jump in if, you know, but it really hasn't been a problem. And part of it is the atmosphere that the facilitator creates. You know, part of it is the atmosphere that the facilitator creates. I mean, people will tell you that I'm a good facilitator for that. You know, you know, I don't want to toot my own horn, but yeah, that's what I've heard. And so, but anyway, so that really is all those rules are gone. You know, we just don't care.
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming for someone coming in new and not understanding the language we use, not understanding, and it could be intimidating to say, they call point of order on me, or don't, like, you have all these rules and it feels restricting, so one would not feel free to express themselves. And I think in that forum, it seems to be a little easier to.
I mean, parliamentary rules can definitely obstruct, you know, group conscience, I think. Anyway, next question. I guess Amitabh has a question from Delhi.
Yeah, hi, that was amazing. Both of you, really amazing. So, I mean, I just had a question. When there is you do have, say, 80% consensus, but there is a strong objection from someone. When the straw poll is done and that person states his or her objection, how do you process that? I mean, a discussion happens, but the person does not change the objection, continues to maintain the same strong objection. So what do you do?
Well, basically, if consensus is reached, we've already heard that objection. So, so it hasn't had an influence. But I do, you know, if I think consensus is reached and someone has a strong objection, brings it up to the body, I ask the body if they want to continue discussion, you know, and if they do, we do, and if they don't, we don't. Now, in the Midwest Zonal Forum, where there is unanimous consensus, you know, we've got policies to stand aside, to do these other things, and we, you know, with 80%, we haven't really bothered with that in Chicagoland. So,
and if that person insists that his or her objection get recorded before the proposal is passed, I mean, does that happen?
You know, we really don't notate what goes into the conversation, but if he wants it in the minutes, I don't think we'd have a problem with that.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we'd have a problem with that. I don't see why not. Any other questions?
There was questions, and somebody keeps lowering hands. I don't know who's lowering hands. Stop lowering hands, please.
I know that we are at 10:29, so.
No, it's fine. We got more time, dude. I mean, this is what the question time is for. All right, so we got Jackie and we got Adam, but I thought, Will, did you have your hand up? Will's typing away. I see.
All right, and I'll go through the chat. Jackie, let's hear what Jackie has to say, because she and I have been.
Jackie, you need to accept the unmute request.
Hi, family. My name is Jackie L, and I am an addict. First, I want to apologize because I didn't get to this meeting early, as I told myself I would, and I'm sure I missed some great information. So my question, though, has to do with training. Lewis is a phenomenal facilitator, and I've seen quite a few. But I'm really nervous for our region because I'm not sure we've had enough training. Also, I wanted to ask about if anybody has experience with using CBDM in regular recovery business meetings. My home group does it, and so I'm just interested to know if anybody else does that.
I know my home group also uses CBDM, my area does, and my region primarily does as well. And using a cheat sheet, so my home group still uses that little cheat sheet. And as we're making these decisions, especially the new members that don't know about this, they're able to follow along with how we're doing as we go. And that offers a form of training in real time. So you see it on paper and you experience it in real time. And I think the combination of both of those really help. It seems confusing to a lot of people at first when they're not used to it. And then once you get in the habit of doing this, it's a very natural conversation just to have. That's really what it feels like, is we're just having a conversation, but we're actually making decisions on things that allow us to move forward. And while I'm here, some of the stuff that we do at the NAZF, there is a deadline, right? So we don't have an unlimited time when we meet. So we prioritize these items before we meet. So some of them we talk about now, and if new ideas or proposals get brought up, we'll bring those to the next meeting or talk about those later. We don't always have time to incorporate all of it right now, but it doesn't get forgotten. It gets recorded somewhere.
Jackie, I also think something that's critical when you're talking about decision making is that everyone has a desire to actually be included, and they allot the proper amount of time for a discussion. You know, home group business meetings, I've been a part of several home groups over the years. And, you know, do you do your business meeting right after the meeting on Tuesday night at 7:45 when the meeting was over at 7:30 and everybody wants to get home and we got to vote before area? And so, you know, I've been a GSR for almost my entire recovery of one home group or another. And so it's hard for us to kind of, I use the word extract, you know, but if I really want to know what's in your head, I have to ask you some questions and you have to give me some answers. And if you don't feel like fucking with me, then it's really hard for that whole process to kind of, you know, come together if members aren't willing to take the time to, because a lot of times over the years, they haven't been asked enough questions or included enough. And so we have a view of what we think it looks like. So, you know, showing them that different atmosphere and allotting the proper amount of time, I think is crucial if you really want to build a strong consensus.
So yeah, we have like 4 hands up too. I just want to make people aware.
Jackie, that pretty good, or you want more? Okay, so we're going to go to Adam, and then after Adam we got Rodney, and then Will, and then Robbie. So go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, hey guys. First of all, thanks again for another great workshop on a Sunday morning. I really enjoy these. You know, I posted this in the chat, but you know, one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in facilitation, especially in CBDM, is when multiple people bring up different modifications to a proposal. You know, like 3 to 4 people will share and like consecutively their own different interpretations of the way they think it should go. And it sometimes is not in a common direction. You know, so being a facilitator, you're kind of like, okay, now I have no idea which way the body wants to go. So how do you deal with situations like that?
Our policy actually addresses that. If a proposal emerges out of the topic, the first one that comes up, you focus on it, and then hear discussion about it. And as other proposals, come up, and here's where facilitation is an art. I mean, you listen for the points of similarity, and you try to bind them into a compromise consensus. And but I always start with the first proposal that comes up. And then from that proposal, we then shift the discussion to that proposal. Our policy actually requires us to write it on the whiteboard, which I don't, which is probably a situation. But basically, from the first proposal, people will comment on that. And then the facilitator has to listen but hear. You really have to hear what people are saying and the points of agreement. And then you fashion a compromise that way. If that makes sense, Adam. Does that answer your question?
It does, thanks. And just really quickly, my home group does a CBDM, but they don't even know it. We sit around and talk until we're all in agreement or not.
we do too, but we do take votes, and it's ridiculous. But anyway.
Yeah. Hey, Adam, for specifics, are you talking about the zonal body where this happens to you a lot, or the regional, or your home group or area, or what, or all?
Well, my experience has been in facilitation of the zone. We have yet to have a virtual ASC meeting, or actually, our ASC and our RSC are both strictly Robert's rules so far. So it's really just been in facilitation of the zone. And as Wilvina and Dennis and some other members can attest, there are some very opinionated people that serve at that level, as is probably the case everywhere. And at least 3 or 4 people believe they have the right answer. Right. So
can you give a specific instance?
Off the top of my head, I can't.
Okay.
It's been at least 6 months since I've been facilitator. So
no, that's fine. I mean, the reason I was asking is that's what I figured, is that you see that need and that kind of conflict happen. It'll evolve the farther you get away from the home group, because we're talking about a bigger geography. And something that we've done, especially at our regional level, is if we have people that, like Lewis was saying, there's these similarities, but once we get to the point of how we're going to provide the service, the areas feel it should be done in a different way, then we say to the areas, well, okay, well, instead of us providing this at the region, why don't all these different areas do the service the exact same way that they want to do it and be autonomous? You know, if you have that strong an opinion about how it should be done, then maybe you should do it your way and we should do it our way. You know, at the separate levels, and then we'll see what works and what doesn't.
Yep.
Lewis, in the chat, Jackie, not Jackie, who is it? Steph V is asking for the Chicago policy.
It's actually online. Go to ChicagoNA.org, and you can download it there. And just like any policy, it focuses a lot on contingencies, et cetera, and so forth. I was actually one of the people who wrote the policies, so actually recently I did refer to it. You know, so yeah. Any yeah, what else?
No, that's good. We got a bunch more questions, so we're going to move to Rodney, and then Will, and then Robbie. So go ahead, Rodney.
Hey, I'm Rodney Manatic. So my area is the Marietta area in Georgia, the RCM, and at our region we do CBDM, and at our area we do Robert's Rules of Order. And the switching back and forth is really confusing for me. I don't fully understand either one of them perfectly. You know, I'm really trying to learn all of it. But one thing that I have, like, I really enjoy the region decision-making process. It's much, to me, it's much cleaner. If that makes any sense, it's much more observant for me. And then when I get back to my area, it's confusing and it's more, for me, it's more chaotic. But a question I have, like, I know in decision-making process, like it's an 80-20, you know, vote. And at my last region, there were two things, and one of them was at 78%, and it was approved. And I'm not sure, because it wasn't 80%, but like for the amount of people that were voting, it became 78%. I mean, but it was approved. So is that logical, or I don't know. I know I'm going to have to ask my area, my region, you know, what that means. But can I get any feedback on that right now from you guys?
Go ahead, Chris. Do you have anything?
So I'm going to do a screen share. And I'm going to show you, here's why you're confused. That's why all of us are confused. This is Robert's Rules of Order. This is the lesson outlines. There are
That's
multiple.
really tiny. You got to make that bigger.
All right, where is that? Right here. So what I'm trying to show you is the amount of information that goes into the Robert's Rules, right? These are all the lesson outlines, right? So this is teaching you how to do Robert's Rules of Order. This keeps going for a little while. All right, and I showed you a single page of consensus-based decision-making. So part of the reason why people get confused between Robert's Rules and consensus-based is because no one actually understands Robert's Rules unless you're a registered parliamentarian. And I know I'm not. I know no one at my area or region is. All right, so that makes it very difficult if people already don't understand the process they're trying to work with. All right, so that's the hardest part right there. So it's likely that your area is not actually doing Robert's Rules of Order. They're doing kind of a mix of both, Robert's Rules and consensus-based, depending on what makes sense and what's easier in that moment. It just blurs everything together. So if you agree that 78% is going to work there and not somewhere else, that's for that body to decide. Robert's consensus-based, we suggest 80 to 90%, but that's up to your service body. You might just say it's 50%. There's nothing in like a hard print that says this is what you have to do. That's up to your body to decide. And if they pass 78%, I mean, I'm not going to sit there and say that they're wrong because that's up to them. Yeah. But that's the conversation you have before you go to any type of decision making. What does it take for a decision to be made here? 80%, 78%, 79%. But that's the conversation you have before you do that.
Well, and Rodney, when you establish quorum and all that too, you might find that the next step up for the next person's vote might have been like 83%. And so that's why they were accepting 78, because it was closer at 78 than it was at 83 to 80%, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, you have to establish that shit every time everybody shows up into the room. And I think that's why what Lewis and them do is great, because anybody that comes gets a vote, you know.
Well, actually, in our situation, voting is only for RCMs and trusted servants, but we rarely ever need a vote. And so everybody gets a vote because their voice is heard, really. And then when it does come down to a vote, you know, if it's a 78 thing, how would I handle that? I'd ask the body. You know what I mean? I'd ask the people who are on the losing side, saying, will you stand aside in the CBDM parlance? Will you stand aside? And if one person does, then do it that way. You know, it really just depends on, as Chris just said, absolutely. It really depends on on your body. I mean, we have 80% written into our policy. You know, one thing that consensus-based decision-making also does is it kind of obviates the need for a quorum. I mean, because if decisions are made by 80% of the people, I mean, you know, that it takes very few votes to say no. So even if you don't have a quorum, I mean, you've still got consensus. So our policy has a quorum, and that's never come up in my situation. And to get to Adam's point, just last month, we had reached an agreement on something. Someone brought up new information, and I reopened it up just last month. And we stuck with our original decision. Some people did change their minds based on the new information. So anyway, next question.
I have a quick input for Rodney about that. Rodney, when Jonathan B., who's a member of the North Star Group, was RDA covering Marietta here, I was area chair, and we had an ad hoc committee to go over CBDM, and it went back and forth for about 3 or 4 months, and I believe the region had already done it, and we tried to go through some training and learning about what the difference was, and it failed at an area level to keep it the way it was. And from my experience, at least back then, I haven't been to area in quite a while, nor do I plan to, thank you. It's a combination of both, and it can get very confusing when you're trying to interact between the area and the region, and it can even get dicey between the individual groups and the area. So if you know Jonathan B., it might be instructive for you to get together with him offline, because he was doing a lot of the presentation of the CBDM back then. And it was very, very interesting time to be involved in the Marietta area, to say the least.
I want to ask one thing right here. Let's pretend we're a service body and we're deciding on 80% consensus. We have 13 people. 80% gives us 10.4. So is it 11 people or 10 people? What do you decide?
Yep.
You know, that's the type of conversation, like before you start voting, that's what you ask. Right? 10.4. I don't know anyone that's a quarter of a person.
Well, I can
got to go to 10
that way, but
Yeah. So that's
All right, so guys, we're going to go to Will. That was an excellent point, Chris. That was excellent illustration. So we got Will, then Robbie, and then Ramon, because Ramon can't raise his hand because he's a co-host. So, Will, you got to accept that request.
I see that a lot of people have asked me to send them the PowerPoint in the chat room. Obviously, I haven't been able to really focus on it. After we end, I will, get all that down, and whoever wants it, I can send it to you.
Hey, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. From 100 in-person meetings to 30. We have now changed our ASC conscious and quorum. My question to you guys is, since we've transitioned into this challenging environment, taking addicts that were meeting in person to on their computer, have you noticed the change, and have you guys adjusted your guidelines to reflect a more accurate group conscience?
Well, I mean, our region met remotely last month, and there really wasn't a big need to do it, to do any adjustments, because it worked just as well. Obviously, now, our region had actually already been using Zoom for people who couldn't attend in person, and so, but I definitely admire Dennis for having 3 screens, because it's a lot for a facilitator to do. But yeah, I haven't had to make any policy changes yet.
So I guess maybe through the service bodies, and particularly the service bodies using Zoom, that really hasn't changed. I'm wondering if there's any ASC representation here that might be able to chime in on that topic. How to deal with the change in voting, change in quorum.
Well, Will, do you think maybe your question's more about not about policy, but about prioritization. Like, hey guys, maybe we're not able to talk about those motions that we had 2 months ago, but we have a budget thing that we need to talk about. I mean, are you thinking that the actual meeting itself is going to change based on priorities? Because that's exactly what happened with the WSC. You know, when they looked at what they were going to be able to facilitate in a virtual space, you know, they asked a bunch of questions about, do you guys feel like it would be appropriate to bring a conscience for the car or for the cat? You know, so when you're thinking about new business and old business, you know, and how are your, because we're getting ready to do a virtual area meeting next week, and we were supposed to do it today, and we decided not to because we hadn't established communication from GSRs to their home groups before they could come back. And we have several outstanding motions, so we reprioritized based on what the needs were. Is that what you're thinking more?
Yeah, that, and you know, we've done, this is our third, we're meeting once a month, now we're meeting twice a month, based upon things are changing so quickly. We got all our subcommittees trying to figure out how to do their business, and a whole bunch of folks that aren't computer literate. That's why I came here, just to find out. This is a valuable tool that's been being used through world and regions, and now I think the ASCs are really going to take a look at how can we serve, you know, H&I's, how can H&I get into the prisons, and we can do it virtually now, which may be attractive to some of the institutions, but so this is all changing so quickly. Our ASC has decided let meet more regularly. Of course, we lost our RCM. He's like, I can't do 2 commitments in a month. You know, your ASCs are 3 hours long, and but I think, you know, some points I do want to thank you guys. So a couple of the points I really liked were really given the lone voice, which our concepts talk about sometime, and trying to keep on track, but really try to listen to those folks who might be the only guy willing to speak up. But then get to the consensus. Let's get back to the vote. Let's really kind of, you know, we want to hear your objections. If you have another objection, then that might change the whole consensus. So let's hear the objections, and then let's see if we can come to consensus. And I really like, we do 85% here in Portland, and it's working pretty well. So anyway, I've got a lot of great tips, and I think that the facts are we're not going to probably have 100 meetings a week in Portland anymore. It's all going to change, and I think, or maybe half of them will be Zoom, and when we are ready to go back to meeting, then the other half will be in-person meetings, and maybe we can combine this conscience for the folks who can't attend in person. Thank you, guys.
So, Will, there is we got a YouTube channel, NA.Virtual.Outreach on YouTube, and it's got all the previous, Dennis can post the link here in the chat for you, but it's got all the previous webinars that we've done, and they're all broken up into the separate presentations for the last 4 weeks. This is the 4th or the 5th week, I can't remember.
Oh, cool.
So there's a fuckload, there's just a fuckload of information on there like you're asking about. So
yeah, before Ronnie goes, I just want to say really quick, the Western Queens area just met last Friday for the first time virtually, and part of getting them online, the RCM and area chair had to text all of the group people, because there's only I think out of 28 groups, there's only 12 of them that are online virtually. Now, the meeting had 26 participants, but only 9 GSRs were in the meeting, but they did determine they had quorum. So absolutely what you're talking about. And I also am wondering whether or not it would have benefited that meeting to have a guest facilitator, because the chair and the secretary were really, really scrambling, trying to just facilitate the agenda presentation, to count the hands up. So, you know, I just wanted to say that I think they could have really benefited by having a guest facilitator.
Yeah, I mean, when people hire me, which isn't very often, I do facilitate as professionally. I mean, and yeah, facilitator can definitely allow the people in, you know, to focus on the issues and less on the group, you know, meeting management. But anyway, I'm not working now. So.
All right, we good, guys? We're going to go ahead and get to Robbie, and then we're going to get to Ramon.
Now, hey everybody, Robbie Attic. So somebody asked about this. Do we have any experience with the group level at the business meeting doing CBDM? We were, but I didn't realize we were necessarily. I first heard about this idea from we call it Group Service Forum, GSF. I don't know where that came from either, but all I know is most of the time GSRs come in and as I did, thrown into it. I wasn't an alternate GSR first and come and learn, and you know, I just was thrown into the pot, you know, and so we had this thing every other month in our area. We do 1 month we have GSF, and the other month is regular business as normal. And the GSF, the GSRs it would be like a training for GSRs to ask questions, to go over stuff, to review different things. And one of the GSF at the time mentioned about this thing about getting like a group consensus, and you know, so I brought it to the home group, and I remember it went over very well, and we've been kind of implementing it. What we did was say, hey, listen, when we start the meeting, I'd be like, open the serenity prayer. Is it okay with everyone if we only have one person speak at a time? Is that okay with everyone? And to be recognized by a show of hand, is that okay? So now, in other words, we learned, like, okay, if I do that ahead of time, then if somebody's talking out of turn or order, we've already agreed to that. So hold on, Jim. Bob has the floor. Hold on just a minute. We'll get back to you. You know, and then the other thing is when we're going over something, nobody in the group can speak twice about it until everyone has had at least a chance to express themselves on the specific topic. So that's kind of, I guess, CBDM in a way, you know, encouraging people to, and most of the time, some of the old timers were like, wow, afterwards, they were like, wow, Robbie, that was really good. Like, I didn't have to say shit, and everything worked out just like, you know, and plus we got to hear from some of the newcomers express themselves, you know, so it was really, I like it, and I'm glad that somebody is leading this charge, I guess, in a way, or whatever you want to call it, you know, to at least make it aware and accessible. And I'm definitely going to encourage area and region if I get the motion in on time. No, but but thank you all so much. I did text Lewis for your number, and also just as a point of reference or question, when somebody has to unmute themselves, like it's confused. Is there like a setting within a setting for that? Because I found like once we had a group where you just unmute them, the host could unmute someone, but then they were unmuted, and the person didn't realize they were unmuted, and they said something inappropriate about the last person sharing, you know, and it was like, oops, like, I didn't know you fucking unmuted me. Thanks a lot, you know. And I don't know, is that the reason why you have to ask? It seems like it's taking more time for people to have to unmute themselves as opposed to just the host just unmuting automatically and moving on.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a Zoom thing. Chris, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so in our settings, when the meeting actually starts, a co-host will bring up manage participants, and then 3 little dots, and then it gives me the option, allow participants to rename themselves, unmute themselves, mute them on entry. So when something like this is going on, before the meeting actually starts, you'll have the ability to unmute yourself. Once it starts going, I take that away just to keep this thing going. And now what happens is when I go to unmute you, you should get a text box right in your screen. Host has asked you to unmute yourself, and the options will be unmute or stay muted. And if they don't acknowledge that, then we just move on. But they get that notification, and we ask them multiple times.
But I thought, because I was hosting a meeting and I was able to mute and unmute people without them doing anything.
That's how it usually works. But if they don't respond, like sometimes they're trying to mute and unmute themselves, then you get your little text box.
Oh, okay. I must.
Yeah.
No, there's a difference in when we hit mute all, Robbie. We hit mute all. It brings up a little square that says allow participants to unmute themselves, or
uncheck.
You know, or you uncheck it and don't. So if we uncheck it, then I have to send you a request for you to know. Now, if I still allow them to unmute themselves, then I can just hit it real quick, and there's not that other kind of two-way communication.
Okay, got
it. You can hit mute all without with still allowing them to unmute themselves.
Yeah, it was kind of it was funny, but somebody finished sharing, and then the person was like, "I don't know what the fuck they were talking."
Yeah, I know. That's exactly the kind of
host was
shit
like,
you want to avoid.
Please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I
So,
mean,
anyway.
our home group is really big on, we took a bunch of extra precautions than a lot of people because we were such a big meeting that, like, you know, we change last names for people. We do all that kind of stuff you're talking about. In these webinars, we used to allow save the chat, and we stopped doing that and we don't allow private chat in these service webinars because people would say shit in the private chat to each other about somebody else, and then we would allow save chat, and then everybody would see it. And so,
Dennis, is there any way I can, because people are asking me questions on here, and there's a lot of them. Any way I can, I'm not done, I mean Shane, what did I say?
no, yeah, you can get in here, and then we'll get to Ramon. Go ahead, man.
No, what I'm asking for is I'd like a copy of the chat so that I can respond to people's requests.
Oh yeah, yeah. I record the chat afterward, but we turned off the private chat thing,
Okay.
so that's the difference in this one. Yeah.
And also, I wish to announce that the presentation is available on the Google Drive, and Dennis put it up there. So anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Ramon.
Yeah, I'm an addict. My name is Ramon. So I thank you. First of all, Louis, thank you. And I was listening to different stuff. And one of the things that made our region easy to go to consensus-based decision making in 2011 was we went from a policy to a guide. And basically what that guide does, it gives us the flexibility to make change for the RCMs, the voting members, or when the facilitators taking the straw poll, to make changes on the spot so that no one, you know, reaching consensus, no one person can say, well, the policy says this. In other words, like, let's say we got to get to California from Florida. I got to take 75 to 10 and then 10 X, Y, Z. And the policy says I've got to get there by car. The guy gives me the flexibility to jump on a plane and get there in 6 hours. It doesn't matter how I got there as long as we kind of get there. And I heard about facilitating, and this is just to answer that question. We had our region 3 weeks ago on Zoom. We had 65 people present, and we knew that was going to happen. One of the things that we did was we did a practice run on the secretary for the Florida region, and we got the alternate together, and we got the 2 facilitators together. And we did a practice run of what our rules and responsibilities. The facilitators facilitated, and the secretaries recognized what hands were going up in the roll call in the direction that it needed to go, so that the facilitators can keep that eye contact that Chris was talking about. Even though it's up on screen, we can keep that eye contact, and they can stay focused on the conversation at hand and let the secretaries decide, okay, who goes next, and count the voting and stuff like that. So they're definitely, and Dennis touched on that. So definitely made it a lot easier for us to get through a region, and we did proposals, we voted on proposals, we practiced consensus-based decision-making. It took us all about 4 hours in that meeting. The only thing that we missed out on was the reports. We asked all the RCMs to just submit their reports and allow the other RCMs so that it didn't turn into an 8-hour meeting. Typically, our regional meeting starts at 9 a.m. and ends around 5 in the evening. So it makes for a long meeting. So that was the only thing that we condensed was the reports, unless there was something, you know, pressing. And we were able to get through it real quick, but we did some practice runs between the admin body before we started this Zoom regional meeting, which made life a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you.
The question of how stringent policies should be is definitely the subject of a whole nother webinar. Basically, it's up to the body, but consensus-based decision-making really allows people to be okay with a little flexibility. Anyway. Is that it? I think that's it. So people have asked me questions privately, and because I am a co-host, and like I say, if I can get a copy of the chat, I'll be able to respond without having to scroll up, because my scroll function is bad, and you know how bad I am. So anyway, Chris, did you want to? Oh, you're on mute.
Shame you to me. If we have no more questions, then I've got nothing more to add. All these resources will be uploaded to the Google Drive. So the PowerPoint, anything that we shared today should be in that Google Drive for everyone. Take what you
Does
need.
anyone know anything about the passwords that on the 5th of April, they Zoom added passwords, and now you can have the option to take it off or not. And a lot of newcomers were texting and calling me saying, I can't get on the meeting. There's a password, and it's not posted. And so it was very strange so I was trying to see if there was a unified thing to say, hey, let's take passwords off or something. It really doesn't add any security. It's public information, so it's not like you're keeping Zoom bombers off. So I don't understand what the password thing is all about.
My home group is posted on our regional website, and when we got forced to use a password, that got posted on the regional website. We removed the password, but left it on there anyway, just so we didn't overwhelm the web servants constantly with these updates.
And they might change it back again. Who knows? Then it'll be posted already.
So.
Okay.